Hello and welcome to ISAS seminar, Nepal in South Asia's Changing Geopolitical Landscape. This seminar will focus on Nepal's foreign policy, imperatives, and its struggle to manage three dominant powers, US, China, and India. To speak on this, we have with us Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, Research Director, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. Chairing this session is Dr. Yogesh Joshi, Research Fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. Dr. Joshi, please.
Thanks, Vinny. Thanks to everyone who have joined us today. We have a very interesting talk and a highly accomplished speaker, Dr. Pramod Jaiswal. He has so many things under his belt, so I'm not going to kind of read out whole of his bio, but I know Pramod very well. He was my senior at GNU, extremely entrepreneurial, and you can see from his CV as well, right? He's worked at so many places, produced so much, and has an eye on Nepali politics, but also Nepal's foreign policy, which I think would be very hard to find. So we are extremely delighted to have Pramod here today with us. I think also the substance of the talk is also very, very interesting, both not only to understand the dynamics of how Nepal looks at the emerging geopolitics, but theoretically too, there's very little literature in a sense of how small states confront great power politics, right? And periods of intense geopolitics are extremely vulnerable. They are also extremely vulnerable during periods of extreme geopolitics, but it also provides them significant opportunities. And I think Pramod will touch upon some of those aspects in his presentation today. So he has a PowerPoint. So without much ado, I will hand over the mic to Pramod. Pramod, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's really an honor to be at ISAS. It's my privilege. In last 20 minutes that I have, 20 to 25 minutes, what I'm going to do is look at, since we have a student as well, I'll briefly touch upon how do small states like Nepal behave in international relations. And then I'll focus on Nepal-India, Nepal-China, and Nepal-US relation and the geopolitical rivalry that is between these three states there in the country. So let me start with could you please move the slide? Yes. Let me start with previous one. Yes. Let me start with looking at how do smaller states behave in international relations. The smaller states are structured. I could not see the slide. Yes, I think Zoom is taking some time to reflect. Let's look at the conceptual framework. Like we have students here, so let's see how do smaller states like Nepal behave in international politics. When we say small state, there are three factors that we look at to define. One, the size; second, economy; and third, the military. Nepal, in terms of size, is not very small. It's 40th largest country in the world. But in terms of economy and in terms of military, Nepal is substantially small. So we put Nepal into a smaller state. So smaller states, they are positioned very low in the structuring order of international system, and they have limited role in Nepal, limited role in international relations, and Nepal is one of them. The primary objective of a smaller state like Nepal is to ensure their own survival and development. Their only aim in the international system is to survive and have economic development. And since these small states have limited role, they cannot promote their interests alone, and they promote their interests only through international organization or alignment or alliance with the big powers. Sometimes smaller states have a difficulty in exercising independent foreign policy. As we know, there are limitations. That's why they do not align with one specific actor, as it can be counterproductive, and they do not want to challenge the alliance. They want to change the alliance to maximize their economic and security gains. That is how they benefit from the international system. The small states, they benefit the most if they're caught between two adverse big power, as it can lead to competition and influence. Nepal is a classic example because Nepal is between India and China, and there is these two big powers of Asia has adversarial relations and they're competing. If a small state is perceived to be closer to their adversary, it seeks to improve its relation with the other state, and in order to minimize the possible static damage. This is the classic example of what is happening in Nepal. Like when India believes that Nepal is getting closer to China, India want to improve relations. And it's same with China. When China believes that Nepal is getting too closer to India, they try to improve relations. Though smaller states do not have a huge influence in the international system, they have limited role. No state can directly threaten a small state because they can align with other power and it can be counterproductive. You might have seen in Nepal city sometime India had challenged Nepal and Nepal changed the sides and India was forced to change its policy towards Nepal. If you look at the history, you will see that the attack on small states have sometimes triggered big power war. If you look at World War I or II, it started with an attack on a very small state. And it happens because it disturbs the whole existing balance of power. I said that smaller states do not have many options, but at times smaller states have lots of choices because they can align with one or the other, they can remain neutral. But most of the time, smaller states have benefited from being neutral because it has less risks. Now let's look at the geopolitics of Nepal. We all know that Nepal is situated between India and China, and both India and China are emerging power. They are in terms of economy or you say military. So let's look at what are the interests of India, China, and Nepal in the region. So if you look at Nepal's foreign policy objective, we see that Nepal want to use China diplomatically to counterbalance India because we have India on three sides and sometimes India is very prominent. And that's why we need India. We have to balance India at times. At the same time, Nepal want to use both India and China for its economic development. That is Nepal's foreign policy objective. If you look at China's interest in Nepal, we all know that Nepal borders with Tibet, which is most sensitive part of China. That's why China's interest in Nepal is security. Apart from that, China also wants to dilute India's predominant position in Nepal. Second is India also has three major interests in Nepal. One is security because we have open border. Open border means there is no border at all. So security. Second is economic because Nepal and India have almost like huge trade. 80% of Nepal's trade takes place with India. So, and we have huge water resources and also that is there. Third is that India also want to promote democracy in Nepal because, you know, as per the democratic theories tend to like each other and it's easy for them to engage. So India want to promote democracy in Nepal. So India has three major engagement interests in Nepal, promoting democracy, economy, and security. Now, if you look at Nepal-China relations, what we have observed is that in Nepal, the ruling regime has moved towards China only when there is a threat for their regime. Like most of the time, the political elite of Nepal want to have deep relation with India. But when their regime has been threatened by India, then they have moved towards China. If you look at King Mahendra, when King Mahendra was not supported by India, he moved towards China. King Birendra, after that, he moved towards China when India stopped supporting his regime because India has always supported the democratic regime in Nepal. So when the ruling regime has felt threatened, like Prachanda, when he emerged as the largest party, he could not build relation with India. And then the relation was destroyed and then he moved towards China. Or you see KP Oli, when India did not support KP Oli regime, then he moved China. So in Nepal's history, Nepal has moved towards China only when the regime has felt a threat from India, where India has not supported their regime. But when Nepal moved to China, China was very careful in response because China knew that India has predominant position and it cannot be challenged. But at times, China encouraged the king because they had very good relations. China used to think that king is most credible, dependable partner, and the political parties were pro-India, or you can say most of the political parties in Nepal were born in India. So they were seen as pro-India. That's why China encouraged the king. And but most of the time they were aware that India has predominant position in the country. For Nepal, cultivating relation with China has worked because we have been able to challenge Indian dominance at times, when India is very vocal, when India has accepted Nepal's policy at times. If you look at King Mahendra time, initially India used to support democracy, but in 1970, when Mahendra moved to China, then India accepted twin pillar policy, which means king as well as democracy. It is same with KP Oli. Like when he moved towards China, India was able to address and their demand, and they were able to resolve their differences. It's same with Prachanda. He was able to use China to counterbalance India. But after Nepal became democratic in 1990 and republic in 2006, China was a dilemma of what to do, because Nepal only had democratic parties at the time. And the king, which was seen as most dependable, credible partner, lost the regime. So China was a dilemma of what to do. So they had two options. One, they had the traditional democratic parties, which was Nepali Congress, CPN, UML, the left parties, which are all born in India, Banaras, West Bengal. Well, the Nepalese leaders used to study in India. Then there was two new parties that had emerged. One was the Maoist party, another was Madhesh Janadhikari Forum, which is a new party that was formed. So China started to have relation with the new democratic parties of that time. And there was two factors. One was that these new political parties were also looking for support, and China was one option. Second was that the Maoist had emerged as the largest party, and Maoist had communist ideology, kind of communist leaning. So at the same time, they also had anti-India, or you can say anti-US rhetoric, at least in that sense. So China started developing relations with those parties, and those parties also had a deeper engagement. In the brief period of, we had democracy in 1990, and then we had republic in 2008. In 2005, there was a royal takeover where King Gyanendra had briefly taken the power. So at that time, China was the only country that supported Nepal, because China supported the king all the time, because China used to think that king is the most credible, dependable partner, and king, being the chief of army staff, was able to address all the concern that China had, which is security. So there was a time where China supported the king strongly, where all the international community has stopped supporting Nepal and the regime at the time. At the time, the country was fighting with the Maoist, and China was the only country that provided military support to Nepal to fight against the party. But in return, King Gyanendra at the time also supported China. He vetoed, he said that he'll veto if China is not given observer status, because India was not comfortable with getting China as observer status SAARC. So he said that veto it on the issue of Afghanistan, that Afghanistan will not get entry to SAARC. So as a return, like King stopped supporting, India stopped supporting the monarchy at that time. Now let's look at the relation between Nepal and China after Nepal became a republic, as I said. Since the republic, Nepal and China has very deep relations, because China, it was 2008 that we got republic, and that was also the time where China had the Tibetan uprising, which was one of the most worrisome for the Chinese. At the same time, in 2008, Chinese had Beijing Olympic, and when China wanted to project itself as an emerging great power, the Western world wanted to humiliate China on the issues of human rights and Tibet issues. So that's why since then, Chinese started engaging very strongly in Nepal. For one reason, that Tibetan activity started increasing. At the same time, China wanted to project to the world that China, the modern China, is rising, and achievements that they have done. So since then, the relation between Nepal and China has deepened in the country. With India, we have open border. We have 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship, and China also proposed similar kind of treaty with Nepal, which could not sign because Prachanda had to resign before he became, at the time, before he could visit China. Since then, there are a number of activities that is taking place in the country. Like in 2014, China was chosen as the country of honor during the second China South Asia Exposition, which was held in Kunming. And when KP Sharma Oli was the prime minister, both the countries had a number of agreement. One of the major was trade and transit. Chinese President Xi Jinping also visited Nepal, which transformed the relations. Now, in 2015, we had earthquake, And at the time, till earthquake, we had only one border point between Nepal and China. That was at Tathapani. But new border point was opened in 2015 because the previous border point was destroyed due to earthquake. And that particular point, Kerung, will be the point where China will be connecting its railway. The Qinghai railway that comes from Beijing to Lhasa is about to reach the Nepal border, and China is also planning to have railway connectivity to Nepal beyond Kerung. At the time of earthquake reconstruction, China was the one who provided a huge amount of assistance, 3 billion RMB. The highest at the time was provided by China to Nepal's reconstruction. Similarly, we all know that Nepal had economic blockade, and that also altered the relation between Nepal and India, and China got edge at the time. In 2016, both the countries signed, as I said, agreement on trade and transit. Similarly, in 2017, Nepal and China signed MOU on Belt and Road Initiative, and China is also planning to have consulate in different other cities of the country. One of them is Pokhara. Let me show you this chart, a graph which shows that how Chinese aid is increasing in the country. This particular image that you can see, the graph which shows that the Chinese assistance to Nepal increased massively in 2005. The major reason was the royal takeover, because China wanted to support the king, and that was the time where China was the only country that supported Nepal in terms of its assistance. So in 2005, there was a sharp increase in aid. Then it was 2008, the Tibetan uprising, and 2015 was because of earthquake. So in the same way, the relation between Nepal and China has also flourished. Let me briefly talk about the aid, the differences, I mean, how India and China are competing in terms of aid. If you look at Indian and Chinese aid in terms of visibility, Chinese aid are very visible. If you go to Nepal, you can see the ring road, which is widest in the country. You can see civil hospital, or you can see the parliament building. All these are made by China. So when China wanted to give any aid, they make sure that it's very visible at the center, very large, so that people can notice it easily. Unlike India, like if India has $1 billion, they might not make 500-bed hospital. They'll rather like to have 50, 100-bed hospital. But if it's Chinese, they want to have 5,000-bed hospital in one center, which looks very huge, which no one can avoid, ignore. In terms of objective, Chinese aid are very clear. Either it has to serve the security purpose or goodwill. But Indian aid was statized during 70s, but in recent times, lack of planning. Like when the Indian Prime Minister goes to Nepal, he gives 100 kg of chandan to a temple. Or there is a Republic Day of India, 50 ambulances to different parts of Nepal. Or 30,000 books, like books that cost 30,000 to different libraries. Now it's invisible, isn't it? If someone gives you 30,000 cost of books, it's like, so there's lack of planning, the lack of strategy in Indian aid. In terms of perception, in Nepal, people have a perception. Perception is not reality. They believe that Chinese aid only benefit Nepal, and China want to make Nepal self-reliance. But Nepalese tend to look at hidden interest of India, though there is not hidden interest, but they try to find hidden interest in every Indian interest. Like when India was making a road from Nepal border to Pokhara, they said, oh, India wants cheaper labor, they want Gorkha regiment, they want inner markets. So that is how Nepalese have, in terms of perception management, India sometimes is not able to manage that well, where the people in Nepal, they tend to ignore Chinese interest. In terms of delivery, which has changed recently, in the past, Indian aid was delayed by decades. Most of the Chinese aid are on time. Most of the Chinese projects are completed on time, but Indian aids were delayed by decades. But since Prime Minister Modi came to power, he stopped promising anything if that is very controversial, or he said that he'll implement all those pending projects, then announce new projects. Otherwise, during every visit, the Indian Prime Minister will announce new projects and they're not implemented, or they're implemented after several delays. If you look at this chart shows the amount of aid that Nepal received from 2010 11. That was the time when I was doing PhD. And I saw that at that time, China was providing 1/3 less than India. Means India used to provide 3 times more aid to Nepal. And that was the perception, that was the, in terms of objective visibility, that was the situation. Now let's look at what the current situation. If you look at the current situation, Chinese aid from Nepal has doubled. When it was India 3 times earlier, now Chinese aid has become 2 times more than India. So the things are changing in the country. Now, this is the map of Nepal. Why I want to talk is like, when we talk about Nepal and Nepal's interest with India and China, the one thing that Nepal wants is connectivity, because Nepal is between world's 2 largest economies, India and China, fastest growing economies, but Nepal do not have development as expected. And one of the major reason is lack of connectivity. So Nepal want to have connectivity. Nepal want to have deeper engagement with both the countries, because that is the only way Nepal can develop. So the red line is the Qinghai Railway that comes from Beijing, Lhasa, and Sigas. The dots are under construction, which will be completed within 1 or 2 years. The upper purple lines are 4 places where Nepal and China are trying to have highways. The lower blue lines are the places where India want to connect Nepal with the railway. Now, let's show you the next slide. If you look at this slide, you can see that initially the 4 countries are working on BBI, and like India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China will work in BBN concept. At that time, Nepal was very excited, because Nepal thought that this BBN will be a wonderful initiative, and where Nepal will be at the center and it will benefit immensely, because the 4 major countries, the major economic region of Asia, were being integrated. At the time, Nepal also proposed that maybe we should have the upper circle, Kunming, Kathmandu, Calcutta corridor should also be constructed, but the whole process on hold. But one of the major reasons behind those propositions was that if Nepal were able to do that, if that happens, if it is materialized tomorrow, that will put Nepal in the center of 3 major markets of the world, which is South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. Because through that BCIM corridor, Nepal will be able to connect itself with China, which is connected with the world, India, which is the major South Asia market, and Southeast Asia as well, which is the largest and emerging economy. So that was what Nepal always proposed. And that is the major reason that Nepal always want to have a kind of trilateralism, where Nepal can be a bridge between India and China, or Nepal expects that India and China can have cordial relations, because their geopolitical rivalry has hurt India's interest, Nepal's interest in the country. Now let's look at the India factor. India has major concern when it is India, when Nepal has any engagement with China. When Nepal was opening its connectivity, or you can say border point with China in 1963, the first Kudari Pass was being opened immediately after the 1962 war, and India obviously has concerns. So till 2015, that was the only border point, or you can say border opening between Nepal and China. In 2015, the second was Kerung, where Chinese are coming with the railway. India has always objected to any engagement that is between Nepal and China, especially at the border. I'll give you 2 examples. China proposed that they'll be happy to support Nepal in Birganj Patlaya Road, which is a road segment near the Indian border. And it was initially proposed by China that they will construct it for free, but it was objected by India. Later, India constructed it for free. There's another road which has a very interesting story, like Kohalpur-Banwasa. Kohalpur-Banwasa project was being constructed by Nepal. Nepal did not have funds, so Nepal went to Arab Bank. They got the money, and they got the Chinese as the cheapest contractor, because during bidding, they were the one who got the bidding. So India had concern, because again, Kohalpur-Banwasa road is near Mahakali, which is near Uttarakhand. So Chinese started working, India objected to it, and India asked Nepal government to stop that project. Later, India made it free. India also had to pay a fine to the Chinese company, because they already started working on those projects. So that was also paid by India. In recent times, there is increasing number of Chinese NGOs in Nepal. The Chinese are interested in media, what you call Confucius Institutes are emerging, different Nepal-China Economic Forum, or Nepal-China Friendship Society. These kind of NGOs are emerging in the country. Mustang has become a place where in Nepal, which is very strategic. It's near the near the Chinese border. And in recent times, all the major power interests, obviously China has interest because it's near China's border. India has also shown interest, as well as America has huge interest in the region. Americans are supporting the monasteries and different institutions. India is providing buses, connectivity, and all those. There was a time where when the Chinese ambassador went and announced kind of school and colleges, the next day the Indian ambassador went. So that is a kind of reaction on Mustang. And in days to come, this region is going to be very important in terms of this geopolitical competition. As I said, we have a peace and friendship treaty between Nepal and India. China had proposed similar, but it has not been passed. When Chinese announced that they will be willing to connect Lumbini with Qinghai Railway, India announced that they will connect Nepal at 6 different places. And after a few years, when China said we are going to implement that project, Modi said that we'll be connecting Nepal from Raxaul to Kathmandu through electric railway. So there is a reaction of every Chinese action in Nepal. We signed BRI with Chinese, then India became very interested in BIMSTEC project, and India is proposing number of BIMSTEC master plan on connectivity with Nepal. So that is how India has concern in Nepal because of China, and India has been reacting on a number of issues there. Now let's look at the next slide. Okay, now let's look at Nepal-US relations. Nepal had the first diplomatic relations with the British in 1816, and then before the birth of independent India, or you can say PRC, we established diplomatic relations with the US. It was on 25th April 1947. But after the Cold War, the relation between Nepal and US was also on halt. Like during Cold War, US was the major partner. It supported Nepal in its economic development. But after Cold War, US was not very active in Nepal. But in recent times, US has been showing its interest. Even before the birth of US aid, US has started supporting in Nepal's development in number of sectors. But after this, like when US came with the Indo-Pacific studies, then US has been very active in the country. For example, in 2017, US provided $115 million for disaster readiness, and additional $110.5 million was provided to the country. After 9/11, American interest in Nepal has been increasing because Gorkha Regiment and Nepal was important in its war on terror. In 2015, when US aimed to counter Chinese economically and militarily, like they have expanded its increase. Even like post 9/11, the Secretary of State Colin Powell visited Nepal and expressed desire to collaborate with Nepal on global war and terror. Similarly, US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, he came to Nepal, and he's one of the senior most who visited during Trump administration, and he said that Nepal is very important from the defense perspective, and US wants Nepal to play a greater role because it has a greater role in regional stability. So that is how the relation between Nepal and US has increased in recent times. If you look at US interest in Nepal, it has one of the major reason has also grown after the 2015 constitution. Like we got new constitution in 2015, and since then the engagement in Nepal has increased massively. After that, one of the major agreement that was that has been in talk in the country is that the Millennium Challenge Corporation, where US want to support Nepal with $500 million grant, which will be spent on 2 major sectors, that is transmission line and roads. So this is the first time that American have started after the Cold War started to invest in the in infrastructure. The reason is that China has been able to make a strong presence in Nepal because of its engagement in the infrastructure. As Nepal needs connectivity, Chinese are supporting major infrastructure projects, and that is where America started supporting Nepal. So that is the new change in trend which you can see in the country. Similarly, like US also want Nepal to play a greater role in the on the Indo-Pacific strategy, and that's why there is new engagement in Nepal-US strategic relations. Nepal and US has very deep defense ties. Nepal has been participating in almost all the peace operations, and US have been supporting in training, exercise, and counterterrorism trainings to the country. In 1965-66, it started. It's not very recent, which has just continued very recently because during Cold War there's a halt. But in 1965-66, US was one of the major partner or one of the major security provider to Nepal apart from India. And during that time, Nepal even enjoyed military equipment that were not even available to India at the time. We all know that Nepal is one of the major contributors to UN peacekeeping force and peacekeeping missions, and US has been supporting in these kind of programs. Similarly, according to former US Assistant Secretary of Defense, Randall Silver, he said that the US has always aspired to create a set of military and defense activities that will help promote Nepal's own goal for its modernization. So this clearly states how US look at Nepal when it comes to strategic relations. Now let's look at, I'll briefly skip this slide on how South Asia is important, because we all are from South Asian studies and you're aware of that. Let me briefly talk about rise of China, because with the rise of India in South Asia, there is also rise. Shall we move to the next slide? This slide basically talk about like how South Asian. Let's look at rise of China, like how rise of China has impact on in the region. We all know that there is rise of India, rise of China, and it has changed the geopolitics of the whole world. China is one of the most important external player of South Asia, and South Asia is important for China's BRI, because if the BRI has to succeed in the region, South Asia become very important. That's why the Chinese president has given importance to the region. Xi Jinping is the only president in China who has visited almost all the South Asian countries except Bhutan, and we know that with Bhutan, China do not even have diplomatic engagement. If you look at China's rise, we see that it is because of two obvious reasons. One is that when you emerge as a power, you create a space around the world, and that is how China has created space around the world, because it has emerged as a power. America is everyone's neighbor, so is China emerging as a second neighbor to every country. Second is that China has been able to create a space around the world when the traditional partners, when they make flawed policies, or when they are not able to meet the aspirations, desire, and demands. Like for example, India is rising, and with the rise of India, the aspirations, desire, demands of other neighboring countries are also rising. Nepal also desire to rise like Indians, and so is Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. They have similar desires. When they go to India as a traditional partner to ask for help, and when India is not able to deliver, then they go for they take other option, and China is the one that emerges. Second is that if you look at China's engagement around the world, Chinese are engaging at full levels. First, they go for trade. When it progresses, they go for investment, and they go for defense cooperation, and then finally they go for political advice. In most of the South Asian countries, apart from India, China is on third or fourth level. In Nepal, it is at the fourth level, because China have started engaging with a political party. They have started training them. They started giving political advice, and the number of conferences coming up in the country around Xi Jinping's thought, Chinese model of development, Chinese model of governance, and all those. Now, the number of countries in the region around the world are engaging with China. And where does the confidence to engage with China comes from? It is because the adversaries, those countries which do not enjoy very good relation with China, like US, India, or you can say Australia, European Union, South Korea, all these have the strongest, or you can say deep economic engagement with China. So when these small countries see that when China is having strong engagement with the adversaries, what is the harm in engaging with China? So that is how these small countries, they engage with China very confidently. We all know that India has been a dominant power in the region, and at times India is unilateral in diplomacy, and that give opportunity for China, because the small states in the region, they sometimes feel that rise of China or China in the neighborhood helps them to, some kind negotiate with India on issues that then they have concerns. Now, let me briefly talk about Xi Jinping's South Asia policy. Like for Xi Jinping, for Xi Jinping, South Asia is very important, as I said, because if they want to have successful BRI, South Asia is important. One of the major factors for the formation of BRI was the development of Tibet and the Western province. So if China want to have development of Tibet, they need to have good relation with South Asia. Then BRI has to be successful in South Asia. That's why Xi Jinping has given importance to South Asia. Initially, in the past, what used to happen is that PLA used to play a dominant role in China's South Asia policy. They used to have firm control. But when Xi Jinping came to power, he put them on hold and he took the power. He tried to give a special attention to South Asia. Another reason is that he actually, if you look at the history, we know that Xi Jinping was born in Xi'an, which has Buddhist link, and he grew up in Tibet, where Xi Jinping's father was the party head. So he is promoting Buddhism as a philosophy in the country. Because if you look at in the past, like his father had written, when Mao wanted to remove religion or ban religion in Tibet, his father wrote 11,000 word letter to Mao, stating that, religion is a uniting force. And if you remove religion, maybe you can disintegrate Tibet, or you might lose Tibet from your control. That is what was advised by his father to Chairman Mao at the time, and he was punished for that. So when Xi Jinping came to power, he have realized the importance of religion, and he want to use Buddhism as a tool to unite Tibet or keep it integrated in China. That's why if you go to China or Tibet, you can see new monasteries coming up. Obviously, they are destroying the old, which has more aesthetic value, but they are coming with shopping mall type of new monasteries, which are very big, huge, signing and all those. So you can see that the number of Buddhist monasteries, Buddhist study center is emerging in South Asia with Chinese support, and even in Tibet. Second is that Xi Jinping knows that the South Asia, South China Sea is vulnerable, and they need alternative routes for all those. So South Asia can be the one option to provide alternative routes for China for trade and its investment. Now let's look at Indo-Pacific strategy, where US is very important. BRI is one for China, but one of the major things that will shape the geopolitics of this region is Indo-Pacific. We all are aware of that. Now, does it matter to Nepal? Like Nepal is between India and China. We are landlocked country, but does maritime security, Indo-Pacific things, all these matters? I think it matters because Nepal and India have open border, and when we have open border, the Nepal's virtually we are open, so virtually the border of Nepal ends at the Indian Ocean because we have access to sea. So, and we have no visa regime, there is no security. So that's why Nepal is virtually a maritime country. And that is one of the factors I think that is important for Nepal. Second is that Nepal is also part of BIMSTEC, and through BIMSTEC, Nepal has also got access to Indian Ocean, or you can say Indo-Pacific region. That is second. Third is that whether Nepal is a maritime country or not, whether Nepal want to be a part of Indo-Pacific strategy or not, one thing is that Nepal will be affected by the Indo-Pacific strategy. The reason is that there is a deep relation between water and the Himalayas. When India wanted to challenge China in the Indian Ocean, where the water, China is saying that, oh, you'll challenge me in the water, I'll challenge you in the Himalayas, which has a strategic implication for India. That's why the more progress is made on Indo-Pacific strategy or Quad and all, there is more aggression of India and China on the Himalayan region. So tomorrow, it is likely that there can be border standoff between Nepal and China, not to hurt Nepal, but to hurt China, to India, because India has a strategy. There are few news in Nepalese media that China is trying to claim some of the strategic places in Nepal as well, which can have implications for India. So this kind of rivalry is existing in the region because of Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think that is the reason that Nepal should focus on this new initiative that is coming. Now, what does Quad or Indo-Pacific mean for Nepal? I think, like every country, it means greater competition. But for Nepal, greater competition means greater opportunities, because in the past, when there was Cold War, I mean, Cold War was not good for the world, and many countries it had huge impact. But Nepal benefited during the Cold War. If you go to Nepal's largest highway, the longest highway from east to west, when you're driving, you can, after 1 hour, you'll see Nepal USSR cooperation. After 1 hour, you'll see Nepal US cooperation. So the whole segment was made by two countries. A single road in different segment was considered by two different countries. So I think this kind of competition has benefited Nepal. It's same about India and China. When you have seen that a project is proposed by China and then it is considered by India. Railway is proposed by China. India is constructing it. So that is how this kind of competition has benefited Nepal. Now the question is Nepal capable to balance such intense competition? I think yes, because in the past, as I said, during Cold War, which was more intense than what is happening at the moment, at that time we have sustained. I think we'll be able to sustain even this kind of India, China or China-US competition in the region. For example, as I said, Cold War. Second, in 1965, when the state of Israel was under formation, Nepal was the only country to support the state of Israel. And Nepal became the only country to support the state of Israel for 30 years. For 30 years, not a single country in South Asia could stand with Israel. Nepal was alone supporting them. Even on the issue of Ukraine, where India and China had abstained, Nepal voted in favor at UN on the issue of Ukraine. So these kind of initiatives are important for Nepal because these will provide opportunities. It has made India serious in the region because of new strategy, new economy, new initiatives. US also want India to play a greater role. As I said, connectivity is one of the major where West was not much interested. Only India and China, or sometimes Japan, was the major provider of this connectivity need or investments in the country. US was not interested in investment. But you just look at the data of last 2 years. Out of 12 new big brand hotels, 8 is from China, US in last 2 years. So the US has also like MCC project is on road and transmission line. So now US in the past was more of a governance or democracy or human rights, those kind of funding used to come. Now they are coming to infrastructure to challenge China. So this kind of new competition is bringing benefits to Nepal. Yes, so let's look at Nepal's understanding on Quad and Indo-Pacific. I think Nepal and most of the other regional countries, they think that there's lack of informity and the interest of Quad members. Like for Japan, Quad or Indo-Pacific is more of economic, for India is economic and strategic, US is purely strategic. So these are sending mixed signals to the region. And Nepal sees great opportunity in the Indo-Pacific strategy and these kind of multilaterals, because as I said, Nepal believes that it's a knot point between China's Belt and Road and the Indo-Pacific strategy. So Nepal thinks it's an opportunity, but they have to be cautiously optimistic about it. The number of visits from US has increased in recent times. Nepal being the chair nation of SAARC and the member of BIMSTEC, US also want Nepal to play a better role in the Indo-Pacific region, that it has been reflected in the region. But the major factor in all these will be China factor. Obviously, because China is a major factor on Quad and Indo-Pacific, because China perceives that it is aimed at them. In Nepal, China has increased its presence as well as in other Southeastern countries. I'll skip this slide. So let me go to conclusion. Like, as I said, China and US are going to increase their engagement and it will be leading to competition. But as I said, it will also bring a number of opportunities if it is managed efficiently. The impact of Indo-Pacific is visible in Himalayas, as we can see in different parts of the world as well. Like if you go to Bhutan or India-China border, these impacts are visible. After the ratification of MCC, the ties between Nepal and US it has increased. They are more proactive in Nepal. Physical infrastructure and regional connectivity are in focus of US as well, not only China and India. One area where Quad or the countries will be can work on is hydropower, because Nepal has a huge capacity in terms of hydropower. We have 40,000 megawatt. We can produce 40,000 megawatt electricity, but so far we have only managed to produce 2,000, so which is a very small amount. There's a huge demand for that because India and Bangladesh are power deficit country and they are struggling for clean energy, hydropower. So I think this is where Nepal and India can work on. Nepal and US is interested these days. Europeans are willing to invest in this sector. And I think one of the major achievement of Nepalese Prime Minister's visit to India last month was that both the countries agreed to generate 20,000 megawatt of electricity. That will be a major change in the, that will bring a major change in the economy of the country. One of the things that I think, and which is with Nepal as well, like a small state, they do not want to be caught into geopolitical rivalry, and thus they prefer economic initiative over strategic, and that's why they're sending, and they're also worried about this, that kind of aggressive competition between US and China can hurt their economic development. I think I'll end it here and open the floor for discussion.
Thanks, Pramod. It was a comprehensive overview of not only Nepal's history, its contemporary foreign policy, its relations with great powers, but also how Nepal is kind of managing both its continental and maritime strategies. So thank you so much for that. I learned a lot. I think everyone in this room should have picked a lot of knowledge on Nepal and how it's managing great power politics from this presentation. So what we're going to do is open up the floor right now, and we'll kind of take questions as they come. So the floor is open. I have a number of questions, but I don't want to misuse the position of the chair. Just please introduce yourself before you ask that question. So the floor is open.
Hi, Dr. Pramod. I'm Bebin, one of the interns over here. So firstly, thank you for the talk. Nepal is not really a topic that often features in this part of the world here in Southeast Asia. So I wanted to maybe hear a bit more from you, because I think you briefly mentioned it when you said that China's interest in the Himalayan region to, in a sense, hurt India. So I haven't read into this, but are you aware of any like territorial disputes between China and Nepal in terms of China wanting to gain perhaps more strategic locations? I think you briefly mentioned, but I wanted to hear more on you from that. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, I mean, there is very little talk about Nepal in Singapore. But I think that this should increase because Nepal, the Gorkha regiment are positioned here, which is very important for Singapore in terms of security. I think in Nepal as well, like there's growing interest about Singapore in recent times. We have more connectivity. We have direct flights from Singapore. We have a number of flights from other regions coming here. So I think it has to increase. The engagement between Nepal and Singapore should be flourished. There are few points between Nepal and China, which is there in the media. There's a place called Humla, which is strategically very important. It can be it's important from both economic and a strategic point. We all know that Nepal and China have deep mountains. There are very few places where you have enough space for commercial activities. So Humla is one place where you can have future markets. At the same time, it's on a very high altitude. So the recent, there are a few media reports which state that China is claiming those positions at the moment. Actually, Nepal army do not patrol many of the places on the north because of high altitude, lack of there's not enough population. I don't have such facilities, can't have military people on the high mountains all the time. So due to lack of capacity, or you can say lack of population, or all those, there's not proper monitoring of those, and those strategic locations are claimed by China. So that is what I've heard or I've read about. Yes.
Thank you, Pramod. Thank you, Yogesh, for organizing this. I can go back to one of the slides that you presented on Nepal's foreign policy objective. You have written that the foreign policy objective of Nepal is counterbalancing China and India. And after that, you have said that through that, development of Nepal through the help of China and India. It's actually exactly as it is, the way you have presented. My problem is that it shouldn't be like that. The objective of a country should not be counterbalancing between two countries. It should be a means to a particular end, right? So the economic development should be the primary objective. And if there is a need to counterbalance two countries, that may be the tool, right? But this is actually the case of Nepal. That is the first point I wanted to make, because I've been knowing Nepal since my childhood days, The second is you have given the perception of Nepalese on India and China and the investment and the interaction with Nepal. You have said that Nepalese think that India's, China's investment is for the help of Nepalese, interest in Nepalese, and in India's case, otherwise. I have seen personally on the ground, it's just the reverse. But yes, what the finding that you have made is true to the elite. Elites, they have come up with this kind of, theory, which works well, fine, but it's not actually related to the population. So if you can counter me, I would like to ask you, what is the basis of this perception study that you have just portrayed? These are the 2 points I just wanted to make. But thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I said that Nepal's foreign policy objective is to counterbalance India. And the reason is that we have India on the three side, and Nepali nationalism, you have to understand where it comes from. Nepal is a small country and it sees India as a threat, and Nepalese nationalism comes through that. So that's why, because India is, it's a huge presence, like you have open border. India has a huge influence on economy, politics. India can do anything if it wants in Nepal. That's why the elite, when they think that India can sometime threaten them, the regime can. We had monarchy for 205 years. So that is how our foreign policy has come from. So when we had 205 years of monarchy, which was not supported by India strongly, Nepal's foreign policy came in such a way that they have to balance India sometime. Counterbalance means just not like when India is very dominant, you need China to balance this. So that has happened many times. When relation is quoted, it's fine. But the moment India has been like on the issue of constitution, India said that it should make some changes. The elite didn't like it, so they brought China. When Prachanda was not supported, China came. When King Mahendra was not supported by King Mahendra was India was supporting the democratic parties. So King Mahendra went to China. So that is how Nepal's foreign policy is working. As you said, it should be different, but the ruling regime have used in that sense. They are the one who controls foreign policy. Second is in terms of perception. Perception can be what I feel. It might not be real. It cannot be truth sometimes. Perception is not truth. It's not fact. So I said in terms of perception, there is a perception that Indian aid benefit India. And why is that perception? I talked in the first slide that if China has to give something, they make it very huge, and which is visible. So in terms of branding, China is very good. You go to Kathmandu, you get out of the airport, there's a high 8-lane road. Who made it? China. Then you cross, then Parliament, oh, beautiful, China. The hospital, who made it? And people are not talking about other hospitals that are made by Indians. I mean, if there is $1 billion China will make 500-bed hospital, but India will divide that. If they have similar amount of money, they will make 500 into 10 parts, 50 bed, or maybe 100 bed in 50 places. In fact, that's good for the country because you have, everyone have the reach to health. So that is good for the country. But from India's point of view, it has not been strategized. Maybe in terms of delivery, that is better. So India is not able to brand well. They're not able to strategize well. At the same time, there is the nationalism, Nepal nationalism come from India to some extent. I personally have seen even in India, sometimes it comes from anti-Pakistan. You just make a statement against Pakistan, you become very nationalist. Sometimes, not all the time. That is how you nationalism. Oh, you say abusive word about Pakistan, you are very nationalist overnight. So let's same in Nepal. Second is that if you look at Nepal's voting pattern, 2/3 of the voters come from left party. So these left party voters also see India as an expansionist, India as a imperial, India and US, they put in the same bracket. So they all see India as a hegemonic expansionist power. So that's one. Third is that the internal politics, the nationalism debate. Like I come from Nepal, from Madhes. When British draw the map, my property was divided in two parts. My house became India, my farm became Nepal. And I had 6 grandfathers, 3 were married, settled down in a house. They said, you get married and settle down in a farm. So that is how I became Nepal. So now the Nepali nationalism, like they see us as an Indian origin. But for me, I'm not Indian origin. I'm from Janakpur, which existed before the birth of India, before the birth of Nepal. Lumbini was there 500 years ago. There were no India or Nepal at that time. So for me, I'm from that particular place. But for the state, I'm Indian origin. I'm outsider. My land belongs to Nepal, but I do not belong to the country. So that is how nationalism works. So when in 2005, the constitution came, the demand of Madhesi was being demanded, but Nepal portrayed, oh, it's the demand that India wants. And Indian media was also like, they're reporting people of Indian origin. I mean, we're not people of Indian origin. We existed there since before the India became a country. So that is how India has also played, that they have propagated as, they claim us that we are, oh, you are my people. We say, no, we're not your people. We are our own people. We say Dharti Putra, means we have the land of that particular place. But India says, oh, these are people of Indian origin just because we have similar culture. But there is similar culture, similarity even in the north. So that is how these nationalism politics are there, which we need a very long discussion on that, which I avoided. But these internal politics of Madhesi Pahadi, which is these places, the left voters, obviously China factor is there. China, as I said, one of the major aim of China is also dilute India's position. They want India is very strong, gradually it has to come down or balance. So the number of issues that give it to the person. So it's not fact. This is how they're perceived. If India make a dam, oh, India want to import electricity. And it is not possible by China. If it was possible, then they would have exported everything. When India make roads, oh, they want market. Chinese market are coming even through India, but they're not talking about it. So it's perception, it's not reality. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Pramod, and thanks, Yogesh, for chairing this. This has been very educational. So I have two questions. One is sort of kind of leads on from what you were also saying. And, this difference that you're drawing between the perception, let's just put it perception of how Africa, China is seen and how India is seen, right, in relation to various things, let's just say economic interests. So what I wanted to inject now was, is it because that China has been a strategic player in different parts of the globe, like, for example, Africa, and its relationship with water, land, and natural resources. So in a way, it is a player which has been in the field for a much longer time, negotiating terrains rather than, India. That could be one of the reasons why the perception then is like, oh, okay, so once India does things, it's to appropriate. Once China does things, it is for the benefit. but that could be also, if you look at how China navigated Africa and its resources, there's some truth lies in that. The other thing that struck me about your very interesting presentation was the use of religion. Now, Modi uses religion as a form of national identity, right? And that national identity is very exclusionary. Am I right in thinking that you said that Xi was using Buddhism? But then how does Xi use Buddhism? Is it for exclusions or inclusion? If it is for how Modi uses Hinduism, then that goes against the grain of Buddhism. Because Buddhism is not about exclusion. It does not exclude. I mean, that's the sort of philosophic motive behind it. So I wanted you to untangle that a little bit about the strategic use of religion and its tie-up with national identity.
I think Buddhist Xi Jinping has no love for any religion. He's an atheist, even by his party rule, or even I personally that he has no love for Buddhism. But he's trying to use Buddhism as a tool, foreign policy tool, what we call soft power. Xi Jinping knows that how Modi has come to power. Religion is one of the major power. So he knows, like his father wrote that a letter to Mao, that religion is a uniting force. You know, so Xi Jinping is developing Chinese model of nationalism. So if you can't use Chinese nationalism in Tibet, so you need Buddhism to work in that sense. That's why, and South is very important when it comes to Buddhism. India is one. So that is one uniting factor. If China has to look South, religion is one uniting factor. So they want to use Buddhism. That's why you can see that in Hainan, they are having a Nalanda type university. They're trying to construct monasteries. And they also realize the next after Dalai Lama, what next? So post Dalai Lama politics will be very complicated for China. That's why they want to hold, maybe they want to dent the whole institution of Dalai Lama. That tomorrow there will be two Dalai Lama, maybe one by Chinese, one by the rest of the world. At least if they're not able to make rest of the world Dalai Lama irrelevant, he can dilute, or he can defame, or he can use as a controversial institution. And at that time, he need a hold on Buddhism or the stakeholders. So maybe tomorrow, like in Nepal, because of Nepal believes in one China policy, we don't allow His Holiness Dalai Lama to Nepal. Maybe China have a new Dalai Lama, he is able to visit Lumbini, the birthplace of Buddha. Maybe he will be able to. So that is how he want to create a dent in the institution of Dalai Lama. So that's why one, he has no love for Buddhism. He just want to use it as a philosophy or a foreign policy tool to get influence in the region. Second is to dilute the institution of Dalai Lama. So that is a second. Third is that, you know, one of the, that I want to just connect with that, like, you know, in Nepal, we have very different relations, you know, like we say, like when we talk about India and China, we feel that, oh, he loves China and he hates India. Because there is so much issues, so many developments, so many engagement about India that we have so many stories. But I have not been to China. I have no stories for China. So it doesn't mean that, oh, I love that country. There's no much engagement in China. There's no much issues with China. China is a distant neighbor for us. So that's why there's no issues. But we have so much deep engagement in India that we fight every day. So it's like husband-wife relations. We are very close, we love each other, but we also fight. But one is a neighbor, we don't care. So this is the situation here. So that's why in Nepal, we say like India, we always say India interfere into our politics. And we hate that. But do you know, in Nepal, we are the one who invite Indian interventions. One group will go to Delhi and they say, oh, you should interfere. That is what we did during blockade. I'm a Madhesi. I said, you should interfere. Look, you had promised us in the past. So what is your role? You should have blockade. Other was like, oh, good. They did to you, good. I'm very happy. A third will curse, oh, this Indian side. Next day, the partner changes. Then other. So this keep on changing. There's always a three force in Nepal. We always have sometimes the king, democratic forces. One is in the center. But in every political change, India has a role. There's not a single political change in Nepal that India do not have a role. So when India is a part of, India is one of the biggest opposition in Nepalese politics. So when you're opposition, you're only abused. There's not a single change in Nepal, not a single political change where India has no role. and India has played a decisive role. I mean, if India said no, it would have not possible. If India would have not supported democracy, we would not have got democracy. If India had not supported the king would not have survived. If India had not supported the peace process, Prachanda would not have been the prime minister. If India had not supported Oli in the past, he would not have been the prime minister. So everyone has got deep engagement in China. And same Oli, which was known as the favorite of India during 8 and 9, because at that time, Prachanda was the enemy and India was using Oli to attack Prachanda. Prachanda was favorite, Oli was favorite of India. And in 10 years, it was the opposite, where Oli is the prime minister and then Prachanda is favorite of India. And so that is how India has been one of the major players in Nepalese politics. That's why, abuses and appreciations for India is very normal. So that's why when you go to India, I say, oh, these Nepalese are anti-Indian. And I said, look, first, you should know the difference between anti-India. Anti-Indianism between Pakistani and Bangladeshi is very different from us. A Pakistani or Bangladeshi, when they say abuses on, it's very different, of different level. Second is that we are part of India's internal opponents. Like Modi had demonetization. Whole India is abusing him. There's no problem. Moment Nepal says, oh, look, this guy is anti-India, he's saying against Modi. If demonetization impacted India, it also impacts us. I was on a holiday for the Sera and I came with lakhs of rupees to India, because in every houses we have Indian currency. All of a sudden I might have to go to Delhi for treatment. My sister was studying, so I had 2 lakh rupees. So my mom said, "Jaldi leke jao, otherwise it will be a piece of paper." So when any policy is idea, tomorrow the price of petrol increases in India, and then Nepalese are abusing the Indian authorities or Indian government. So we are part of Indian domestic politics. We should not take it like, oh, we're anti-India or they're abusing, So the level of that we say, we are often termed as anti-India, that is very different from anti-Pakistani or Bangladeshi version of India.
No, so Devyani, but yeah, the familiarity argument is, the sense that the only distaste you develop for power is the power you have tasted, right? So, so one can understand that point where the engagement, the historical engagement with India is so much that you distaste that power, and maybe tomorrow, when the engagement with China comes to that level, you would distaste that power too, right? So that's the nature of power, and that's actually a very spot-on argument in that sense. Devyani.
Good afternoon. My name is Devyani. I'm a research analyst here. So I had a couple of questions. One was, of course, about perceptions. I think it's interesting that you talk about branding. But what I also feel, and you did point out to it, but I would want you to sort of go into it with a little bit more detail. I think more than Chinese branding, it also is a very good reflection of the deep domestic crevices that exist in domestic politics. And I think it is because of that the recent U.S. Nepal agreement became such a controversial event. And I think it is these domestic crevices that are actually shaping foreign policy. So that leads me to my next question, which is that what, according to you, are certain continuities in Nepalese foreign policy? Because it feels like when the regime changes, the support for either of the sides changes. So there is no continuity in at least in the recent past. So those would be my 2 questions.
So before you do that, we just have like last 5 minutes left. So let me put, my questions on the table. I think we have far bigger comparativists sitting here, look at these things much better than I do. But one of the things which I have kind of observed, right? And this kind of dovetails to what Devyani's question was, that at the end of the day, in states which face resource crunch, right? Elites do get their legitimacy by distributing the distributive power or the allocative power of resources, right? And their foreign aid, particularly in such resource crunch countries, becomes extremely important for domestic legitimacy. You can see that with CPEC's distribution in Pakistan. You can see that in Sri Lanka, you can see that in Maldives, right? And that also leads to a huge division within the elites. And one could see that, right, with the crisis in Maldives or in Sri Lanka, with these political parties fighting for who will allocate resources. And foreign aid, that's the major source, right? And that's the danger of it as well. And I would like to know, how do domestic politics in Nepal kind of span out on this distributive mechanism of foreign aid, and what it has done to domestic politics in Nepal, which kind of dovetails with Devyani's question of domestic crevices, but that's there's some malignant effect of foreign aid, right, which happens in domestic politics. And what is that? Has Nepal seen it? And in a sense that what is happening on the ground on that?
Yes, foreign aid is very important for the country. We are known as the darlings of Europe. Like, we get huge funding in the country. The youth of Nepal has been in Nepal because of foreign aid, especially for youth. Everyone wants to work in NGO. In India, people want to go to universities. In Nepal, if you want to go to universities, what will you earn? 18,000 rupees? We earn in a day, or we spend in a coffee shop. So the government, no one want to go to UPSC, IPS, IFS. No, it's in India. Where do you want to go? It's NGO, INGOs, foreign international organizations, because the love for dollar for us started in 1816. We started with the British. We went to join Gorkha Regiment. We continue to get dollar from Singapore. We get from everywhere. So foreign is very important. Now let me continue from there. Like, to some extent, the position of India has been diluted. In the past, Nepalese elite used to go to Delhi, Banaras, and study. Now they go to US, they go to Australia, Europe, Singapore. So they have lost that major elite. Now, who is going to India? It's the middle class. More people are going to India. India, in terms of that level, the reach has increased, but the decision maker who are the major in the past, like Baburam Bhattrai, he studied in India, army chief, he studied in all the. Now the new decision makers are from different countries. They are from Australia, Singapore, and all. There are very few in India. So that has changed. Second is that there was one class of people, they were supported by India, the democratic forces. Now, what are the other class? They were not supported by any countries. Now China is using that space. The left parties are not supported by India. Left parties are not supported by Westerners. So they were resourceless. So now China, oh, you need money, take it, unite, minimize. So China is now investing in media. As I said, 2/3 of the voter. In Nepal, there was a time when we had 17 left parties. So India and West used to keep them fragmented because they know that if they unite, they'll be the largest force. That is what China did last year. They just put Oli and Prasanna together, and it was a headache for both China, US and India, because they had almost 2/3 majority, almost. If they had 2/3 majority, they could have changed everything in the constitution. So that is how China has actually, after 2008, Chinese got the learning for democracy for the first time in Nepal. They had no idea what is democracy, what is election, what is proportionate representation, what is Nepali Congress. They had no idea. They started learning, and in very short time, they have been a very good learner. They have learned quite well because now they're able to unite the forces. They are able to change that. They have been able to influence. Like, it was initially India was interfering in everything. Chinese have learned in last 2 years. You can see that Chinese are meeting the president at midnight and asking, oh, you should not secrete, you should do this. So in fact, the India has been very quiet these days. In last, after blockade, India is very good in terms of, it's like the role changing is there. India has become like Chinese, very quiet, don't speak, do action, don't act, don't speak. Now Chinese are doing, and in fact, the Indian ambassador told you, that Chinese are doing the same mistake that we did. So now Nepalese media have started writing about Chinese intervention, Chinese unnecessary interference and all. So these role changing are taking place. Second is that, like, you said that what is the continuity in Nepal? You said things are changing. It's not, that is there. Like, Nepal has not been, you think that Nepal should be Nepal do not be like that. You keep on changing and all. That is the nature. Nepal is changing. You said unstable, you can say it unstable. That is the continuity. It will remain like that. The reason is that Nepal is a small country between two big powers. You said Nepal should be stable. No, it should not be stable. This is the nature that Nepal will have. Unless Nepal will emerge as a strong country, how can it be stable? When you have India and China, you are competing, you know, and there is another factor which is also in South Asia. It's not only India and China. So if they can't have coordination, how can we be stable? That's why we just can pray that, oh, there should be no rivalry between India and China. Maybe they should cooperate and all. So unless we are a small country and two big power rival competing, we can't be stable. That is not possible because the interest, there's no overlap of interest. You know, there is divergence. Where China want to dilute India's position, India want to promote democracy, you know, economic interest for both. Tibet is very sensitive. You know, for us, Tibet, for US and other, democracy and human rights are important. So there is no there is no overlap in interest. So how can we be unstable? So the continuity for us is continuation of instability, but you can say that ping pong diplomacy, which will keep on shifting. That is how we have survived. It's not like, you know, in 17th century, we had a king, when was it? Amsubarma. In ancient times, we had a king called Amsubarma. And he had a daughter and sister. He gave his daughter in marriage to India and daughter in marriage to Chinese king, sister in marriage with the Indian king. That is how we survived. So that is how we have survived. You want Nepal to check one permanent side? It's not possible. You can't do that. The moment we are very close to India, next day we have to go to China. And the moment we are very close, we have to go. So that is not instability for us. That is the strategy for survival for us. Not taking one permanent side, keep on changing is the foreign policy tool for us to survive. It's like that. So you can't think, oh, Nepal should be unstable, it's all, oh, you keep changing sides. Changing side itself is a policy that will keep changing sides. We'll not have a permanent friend with India or China. And that's why sometimes we can stand with countries like Ukraine. Sometimes we do, we take independent policy, but when it is not directly impact to them. If it is Israel, oh, no one cares. So let's take a stand. On Singapore, we can do that. If Singapore or climate change, we are together. So it's not possible because, as I said, there are two big powers, India, China. They are two different ones. They can't. Do we see the possibility of them coming together? Not very soon. It's almost not possible. They are two competing to be a global power. You know. So I think it's not possible in that. So I think the continuity is that this instability will continue.
Great. So we are over past the time now. I think it's a great end to this discussion in a sense of looking at how Nepal is trying to position itself, and it's very difficult to put yourself. You know, if you come from a big state or one which has effective means, it's very difficult to put yourself into those shoes and start thinking, the way they do. But I remember, and it's not as if big powers like India don't think exactly the same. I remember one of the top secret assessments of Sino-Soviet dispute in 1969 was that the crisis should continue, but it should not blow over. Because once it blows over, we have to choose sides. I think Nepal is in a similar position, right? The crisis should continue so that we can mint whatever we can mint. But if it blows over, then you have to choose. And that's a situation similar in Southeast Asia, right? So it's a very liminal position and a very delicate position. And therefore one can understand, right? And one should, but that's also, that also means that in very intense geopolitical competition provides amazing opportunities, but also creates extreme vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and on that, it's just kind of striking that, in terms of development, I mean, Nepal would never be seen as the developed nation if it occupies this liminal space. See, that's another debate that opens up for development.
Exactly. So yeah, so we'll have this conversation after the after this session is over. Thank you so much, Pramod, for coming over and giving such an excellent presentation. I think we are all much more knowledgeable in hindsight now. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.